Casey, I have 402, so I'm gonna share my screen and we are gonna get started, and I'm gonna assume that our last speaker will join us a little bit on the late side and we'll make that work. Okay. Present. All right, everybody seeing my screen? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, we're good. All right. So, welcome. I'm Deborah Gallant. I am the facilitator for today's session. This is a deep dive. A deep dive is what we're calling them at EforAll, because our mission at EforAll is to help startup entrepreneurs. But as our panelists who've worked with our entrepreneurs for many years in some cases can tell you, sometimes when you graduate, you don't know everything you need to know. Your baby bird is not ready quite to fly out of the nest. So we came up with this series, and if you haven't joined us for one of them before, they are all recorded and you can access them on the EforAll website. We've done really terrific ones on hiring your first employee, getting found in Google search, on e-commerce. Last month, we did one on getting certified as a minority or woman-owned business. These are really amazing opportunities to learn from the experts and ask your questions. So today's topic is not the most upbeat, positive one we've ever had, but I want to tell you that it came organically from the EforAll community. We've started over 500 businesses across all the years we've been in business at EforAll, across all of our sites. And many of you, especially people in food businesses, I think have been hit really hard by the pandemic. So one of the questions that came up, and what's interesting is when we have this conversation internally at EforAll, is how many of us have side hustles, right? We have a business on the side, we have a store or a pop-up that we run. And we didn't know the answers to the questions of, what if I just don't do business? Can I close it? Can I just stop paying my taxes? Is there something I actually need to do? Can I pivot it? Can I put it on hold? So we came up with a sort of a positive spin on how to get through the crisis. We're calling it pause, close, or pivot, which are kind of the three choices you have if your business is struggling. And you are going to get three of our biggest brains across the EforAll mentor and specialist network who know so much more than I do. I will introduce them more in detail, but I just want to say thank you to them, because during the holiday season, we had to have our planning call and they signed up for it and they're like, what is this? When are you doing it? It was, we were all in overwhelm, but they're here today and they're so ready, willing, and able to answer your questions about how to get through this. So let me tell you what it is we're going to try to accomplish here today. Oops, this is my EforAll slide. I'll get to that in a minute. So we are going to have everyone talk. We're going to ask lots of questions, and I'm actually hoping that they ask each other questions too. So I know that sometimes people stumble into our learning and go, who sponsors this? What is this? So we're EforAll. I am at EforAll Berkshire County, which is in Western Massachusetts. And we run business accelerators and pitch contests in 10 different communities. Most of them are in Massachusetts, but we do have one in Colorado. So if you are in a startup business and you don't know about EforAll, you should look us up online. Also, our founding sponsors are what makes this possible. And I always like to include this slide. If they didn't give us money, we wouldn't be able to do these great programs for you. We do these deep dives every month, either on the second or the third Monday afternoon, 4 to 5:30. I kind of split the difference. It's the end of your workday. Hopefully you can fit us in. We have a really good one next month about negotiation skills for small business success. So if, for instance, you're still paying your full rent to your landlord, even though you're not there, you need to come here and learn how to negotiate that. And in March, we're going to do one too. There's more to marketing than social media. This is one of my bugaboos. I have an MBA in marketing from Columbia, and I was in marketing before there was social media, before there was internet. And you know what? For many businesses, there's still a lot of options that aren't all about Facebook, and Instagram and Pinterest and all those other things. So I think they're both going to be terrific, and we have a panel for that one as well. All of our deep dives are archived at eforall.org. So today's format, we're going to have each of the panelists speak for about 7 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to take Q&A from the audience. Now, I've also already sent the panelists some questions and answers that I want to discuss, but I strongly encourage you to use this opportunity to ask your own questions. And literally, you have access to a CPA and attorney without paying their hourly fees. So, and a terrific business coach. And of course, I want to let you know we are recording this session. And Casey, do you want to pop your camera on and just say hi? Casey is our program manager in Berkshire County, and he is running our webinar back end for me today. And he'll help moderate the chat and all that. So what I'm going to ask is I'm going to introduce the three in general, and then I'm going to ask them to tell you about their background and just talk for maybe about 10 minutes each about kind of what they're seeing out there with struggling businesses. And Lisa was on early, said, you know, some of them are doing great and some aren't doing great, and tell us some stories and what you see out there. Then we'll hear from each of them, and then we'll do the discussion and the Q&A. You can type your Q&A even in the chat, but we're going to save those questions till after the first 30 minutes. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to introduce Lisa Raish, who's a CPA, her business, Bodhi Business Advisors. And before I go any further, these three experts, all women, yay, are from 3 different EforAll sites. So we really have combed our network. Lisa, you're primarily with Silco, right? South Coast, but she's worked with us in Berkshire County before, and we'd love to have you. And Lisa, you're up first.
Well, thank you, Deb. So I am Lisa Raish. I am a CPA. I'm based out of Massachusetts. I am very actively involved with EforAll. I am on the leadership advisory board for the South Coast area, as well as being I'm the pricing specialist. I started off in the SoCo, and I found myself doing pricing in a number of the other areas as well. So you could get me, jazzed up and running on and on about pricing for hours. But I am a CPA, and I work very closely with businesses. I specifically work with businesses from tax and bookkeeping up to advisory, building budgets, forecasts, all the way up to outsourced CFO. So through this pandemic, I have been living, breathing, eating, sleeping, not only my business, but my clients' businesses. And for some of them, like we were discussing before everybody came on, some of my clients are doing phenomenal. I have clients that I talk to, and every time I talk to them, they appear to be hiring somebody else, and they've brought on another client. And I spent time on a call this afternoon with clients that honestly, we're just trying to keep them alive week to week, invoice to invoice, close deal to close deal. And for them, this upcoming PPP opportunity is an opportunity for them to hopefully hold on for a little bit longer. So one of the things that I think I wanted to really impress upon people is, number one, no one did anything wrong. No one made a misstep in their business, and now they're trying to figure out, what they did wrong. What all of us are going through right now was thrown in our laps. I personally had clients of mine that had their best years in 2019 and were on par for 2020 to be the best years that they were ever going to have. So this was just a wrench in everybody's plans. No one planned for this. When I built budgets and forecasts for clients at the beginning of the year, this was not in anybody's plans. What I will say, and I think it's really important, that if you've come through the program, you probably do some level of planning. But if you don't do planning and you don't have a set of financial statements to go back to, now is the time for you to start to do it. You absolutely need current financial statements. I don't care how terrible your revenue is, and there isn't a lot going into that ledger on a weekly, monthly basis. If you don't have good financials, you cannot start to make good decisions about whether or not you should or should not move forward in your business. So I think the biggest thing is do some planning, get caught up with your financials. And in all of this, there's going to be a lot of plan, test, adjust, plan, test, adjust. And it's going to be a lot. It's going to probably be more regularly than you typically would, but that's what you have to be ready for. You've got to be ready for anything that happens. And for instance, we've got this new PPP that's come up. You've got to have your documents in order. You have to, you've got to know if you're going for a second round of PPP, if you had a decrease in revenues year 19 to 20 in order to qualify for it. If you don't have that information at your fingertips, not only can you not quickly make a decision to actually go for this loan, but you can't make decisions in your business. So it's vital that you have your documents in order. Do you have your payroll tax reports at your fingertips if you need them? Do you have a set of financial statements at your fingertips in order to make decisions off of? Do you have your basic information in a place where you can, in fact, pull it and use it? And what I find is a lot of times people don't have that information. So they're going to, this one wants a copy of my articles of organization. I don't know where they are. Now is the time for you to get them from your attorney, to go on to the Secretary of State's website and pull them down. Build out your documents because you're going to need them, and build out your financial statements. I know for some of you, revenue is terrible. You don't even want to do your financials, but you can't make decisions about whether or not to move forward, whether to pause, to pivot or close if you in fact don't have that information at hand. So I'm all about the financial statements. I'm all about getting current, and I'm all about having your documents in order.
Well, Lisa, that was very clear and just what I'd expect from the CPA. Let me ask you one clarifying question before I move on to our attorney. When you're sitting and doing projections here, it's January 11th, 2021, are you giving a date in the future for reopening brick and mortar and seeing an uptick based on what you can tell about what's going on with vaccinations and reopenings?
Personally, no. For some clients, we will forecast out a year. For my clients that are in a better position, I'll forecast out a year. Clients that aren't in a good position, honestly, we're not forecasting more than 3 months because I have absolutely no idea. I have one client I have a cash call with every Monday afternoon, and honestly, I have no idea where they're going to be next week, and I don't even think they do. So to forecast out beyond 3 months, with the vaccinations, I mean, you're hearing the stories that they're not vaccinating as quickly as expected. You're hearing in some places where people are refusing the vaccinations. So I'm not necessarily putting any kind of hard and fast date on the calendar. It's part of that, honestly, that review, adjust, test it out, review, adjust, test it out, and really it becomes very, very fluid.
Very helpful. And I have lots of questions for you. Let me ask one last clarifying question. Can you make any statement, and maybe you can't, about the kinds of clients who are hanging in there and thriving in 2020? Do they have a certain kind of customer base, and versus those who have really just been so taken, brought low from this that there may be no recovery?
So I have clients who are in kind of some of those hot button industries that naturally they're just kind of holding on right now. From that perspective, the ones that have held on were very strong in their businesses previously. So we're willing to really evaluate what was happening, make adjustments. We're really willing to make a pivot if they had to. I've had others in better sectors, so it's not been so jarring. I have a handful in sectors that I absolutely never would have expected there to be any challenges in, but because of what happened, they in fact, they have been in business for a while, and sometimes some of them had gotten a little bit stuck in this is the way I've always done it place. And for them, it's been more of a challenge to get them out of that, well, this is the way that we always done it. Well, this is just unprecedented. We're trying to keep you alive. We're trying to get you to the other side of the mountain, however big that mountain is and how wide it is. So I think there's part of it is depending on the industry you're in. And also some of it, honestly, is personality, how driven the entrepreneur was prior, how organized they were prior, how open they are to change. Even though they are an entrepreneur, some of us do get set in our ways and may or may not be willing to change. So it's been a combination of industry and personality.
Great answer. We'll come back to you, Lisa, with lots of questions. I'd like to go to our next panelist. Priya Lane came so highly recommended from my colleagues at Lowell Lawrence. She is an attorney, and I'll let her do her introductions and tell you kind of what she's saying out there.
Hi, everybody. My name is Priya. I am the Biz Grow Director at Lawyers for Civil Rights. That's just what we call our small business work. So we do free legal services for minority, immigrant, and women-owned small businesses. So we have workshops 2, sometimes 3 times a week on different legal issues, and sometimes non-legal issues as well, like business planning and marketing. We do clinics around once a month where you can sit down with an attorney for 20 minutes or so and talk about specific small business issues you might be having. So you want to talk about a trademark, and then, we'll kind of speed date you with an IP attorney to talk about that, for example. And then we also do individual representation. So, for clients who need their their business entity formed or something like that, we'll do an intake with you and kind of talk it over with you and then send it out to one of the large law firms in Massachusetts. And we represent businesses all over the state. So I work with upwards of 700 businesses a year across the Commonwealth. And so have seen obviously a large range of different scenarios the past year or so play out on these issues. I get a lot of questions about bankruptcy, and I think we're going to be talking about bankruptcy today. I think that I hope that you leave here, with the idea that bankruptcy is actually sort of the absolute last resort and is in no way sort of and giving you the ability to just walk away from something. Bankruptcy will probably make your personal life even harder, which, we don't want your business to do. And I think this decision between pausing or closing or pivoting is really personal, and it depends really on your own personal business, your business model, as well as your own risk tolerance, right? Just thinking about examples of businesses we've had some businesses pivot really well this past year. So businesses in the food industry, restaurants who have repurposed servers that wouldn't have work because they were either closed, the dining room was closed, or at a much smaller capacity, repurpose them as delivery drivers. So they're still kind of maintaining staff and also maintaining a client base who might be, unwilling to come into a dining room right now, but will take delivery. And so, pivoting that way. Also, a lot of mask businesses. But I think that you need to keep in mind what your original business is. So if you're doing something with lasers and you pivot and start making masks, then you lose a lot of your client base because now people think you're a mask company. So we've seen a lot of success for businesses that make textiles, so make clothes, make dolls, do something already, and are adding masks in to their inventory, right? And so if you're able to pivot and do something similar to what you're doing, that's great. And then you can keep your client base and then go back to what you originally wanted to do, hopefully eventually. We've also had a lot of businesses that have paused. I'm thinking of like a coffee importer that I work with that paused for like 4 months because they were getting orders in. Everyone's making more coffee right now because they're at home. So getting a ton of orders in, but it was just getting really hectic because they were working out of their house and they had coffee everywhere. You know, it was just like, had to rethink the whole system. And so in situations like that, it makes sense to like pause for a couple of months, not take any new orders in, figure out a new system, and then go forward. You know, what I have not seen success is businesses that, you know, oh, sorry, I did something on my screen. I think we're okay. Like Lisa said earlier, a business kind of unwilling to change and just saying something like, I'm going to pause through the pandemic, right? Like, I only want to do business the way I used to do business, and therefore I'm just not going to do anything while COVID is around. And I mean, as you guys, I'm sure, can imagine, like, that is an untenable option when we don't know when the end is coming. And also, you know, people will forget about you. Everyone's life is changing. And so you want to make sure you're still in their lives, right? You want to make sure your clients still think of you as something that they need. And then finally, we have helped, you know, some businesses close. And I think that it's just a really personal decision of looking at your personal finances, your lifestyle. You know, is this worth it still for me? Do I think I can make it over this hump? You know, what are my plans going forward? But again, you know, the goal is to avoid bankruptcy proceedings, because most likely you've all given, because all small business owners do, personal guarantees on a lot of your, you know, different agreements with different creditors, be it a landlord or a bank. It is almost impossible to be a small business owner and only have agreements in the name of the LLC or the S corporation. That means that when you discharge the business's debts, they just come to you personally because you've given a personal guarantee. And so they're going to affect your personal credit, which will then affect your ability to open new businesses, open new credit accounts, you know, do all the things that you're going to want to do. And so, you know, the best way to close your business is to liquidate all your assets, pay off all your creditors, and you know, hopefully negotiate with the creditors if you don't have enough liquid cash to pay them off. And then you know, deal with any paperwork required for your specific entity. So that's normally just a quick filing with the Secretary of the Commonwealth, and also a filing to the IRS when you make your last tax payment. So it's not, you know, the paperwork is not difficult. It's just getting all your creditors sort of discharged that becomes sort of the sticking point when deciding to close your business.
All right, we're definitely going to get more into that, because also some people are DBA. Do you need to do anything when you close a DBA? But we'll go there in a minute. I want to introduce our final panelist, Fia Thomas, who comes to us from the EforAll Roxbury program, where I think you're like, you do everything, right? You're a mentor, you're a specialist, are you on their board? Kofi's a big fan of yours. And Afia is a branding and marketing consultant in Boston. And now we have the CPA and we have the attorney, but I wonder, as somebody who works literally, you know, boots on the ground, helping make sure that businesses are staying afloat, what you're seeing in terms of people who are struggling and how they handle that pause, close, or pivot conversation.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. This is a great panel. Lisa is a great friend of mine and has had some of these very intentional conversations as well during some of my pause, close, and pivots. And I've received emails from Priya. So love the work that you're doing as well. For me, I'm a brand growth strategist here in the greater Boston area, also a serial entrepreneur, published author, and former Harvard Human Resources professional. I say serial entrepreneur because I've, throughout my experience, had to pause, close, or pivot many times. Some, you know, for reasons that I may have just wanted to even pivot for purpose. As far as the struggles that I am seeing with companies, is that those who were already online sought a better chance to kind of like take this blow and take this hit. this was a conversation that I was having, I want to say, for so many years, of encouraging, especially brick and mortar businesses, to make sure that they were interacting online and that they didn't just kind of limit to, customers and consumers that were coming into their business, but made sure that they were equally spending time, for example, in Facebook groups and associations, and making sure that wherever their target audience was, that they were kind of hanging out and taking up and really just interacting in that space as well. So I've seen brick and mortar businesses who failed to have a Facebook page or didn't really do much online really struggle, whereas others, it was a quick redirection of their marketing that they had to do and that they were ahead. As far as like tips that I would have, businesses should always be innovating, looking for opportunities to scale and grow, to meet the opportunities and meet the needs of their clients and consumers. And then just to go back over what I just said, know 2 to 3 places where your target audience is hanging out. I believe Lisa and I met in a group where we were just kind of like interacting with, fellow business women, and it grew into a larger partnership. And so that is what is necessary. So for example, if you're a career coach, hanging out on LinkedIn and providing value in certain places, that now when we're talking about pause, close, or pivot, you can actually even reach out and network in that way to see what you can do. So kind of stop there. Hope that that's helpful. But that's pretty much what I've been seeing. Those that were online had a better opportunity to just kind of switch and pivot.
Yeah, I think you actually bring up a really good point. And I think this goes to what Lisa and Priya were saying about people's mindset. If someone had a brick and mortar store and they thought that that was fine and it worked great, and they weren't willing to do that digital pivot, they got left behind in the last 8 months. I wonder if you can add a little bit of color to your story about, maybe give us a story of a business that you exited, maybe not pandemic related, but how you knew it was the right time to close a business. Because I think that there's a lot of people who feel like their own self-esteem is so baked into the idea that closing it feels like a personal failure. And I think people hang on to these things maybe longer than they should. And how did you come to any of those decisions? Can you tell us a story?
Sure thing. So my very first company was Trifecta Coaching, and I started out, and I was actually in career development at the time, and I started to experience a little bit of burnout. And then I was also kind of a little bit jealous of my family and friends that were able to take vacations whenever they wanted to. And they seemed to be living the good life. And as an entrepreneur, I was just like, geez, I feel like I'm always kind of like, really pushing this thing. And so that was my first, I guess, idea that I needed to kind of pause. What I did there was I reached out to a mentor of mine, and I was like, listen, I don't know if this is the right thing for me. I don't know if, I'm just kind of, spinning my wheels here. The business is profitable and I'm enjoying it, but I just don't know if there's quality of life, if my quality of life is where I would like it to be. And so by the end of that week, I had a job offer. They asked me what my salary requirements, and then they gave me a little bit more on top of that. Well, I stayed there for a little bit, and what happened was I couldn't really manage a full-time business and also work full-time, because that position was very demanding. And so it kind of faded off a little bit, and I made the decision that I wanted to just, at the time, spend more time with my family and just focus that way. So that was kind of the close of that business. That position led me to my role at Harvard University. And again, it was just a little bit more demanding. So I couldn't run my business alongside it. At that moment, I was very happy with kind of closing down, and it fit into what I needed for my life. Most recently, I was in the process of opening the Workroom, which is a co-working space for women entrepreneurs. And so I had really fought to kind of keep that vision alive for such a long time. My mother was battling cancer and then, recently passed away, but I knew that I wanted to continue to kind of like, get women together and to kind of create a space where women co-lead. So I was working on that. And then here comes the pandemic, right? And so it's like, yeah, here's the saving grace. If you had opened that co-working space any earlier and got hit like this as a small business, this probably wouldn't have been a good thing. And so quickly I pivoted back to what I was doing, which was really being in the coaching space and some design work that I was doing. And so that was that pivot. So I've closed before, I've paused and moved on to a corporate position. And most recently, this pivot of opening a physical space right before a pandemic, it wasn't the way to go. Yeah.
Great. I actually am gonna start talking to the panel and giving you guys some questions, but actually I want to go back to Lisa and Priya and Afia and see if there's anything you want to say about what your co-panelists said before I start leading questions.
I agree with Afia with regard to people having a digital presence pre-pandemic. That was key. If you had to recreate yourself online, you were basically starting from scratch. So that was I think a huge benefit for a lot of people. And I actually have clients that are in the social media space, and they had that initial kind of drop in March, April. And then once everyone who wasn't online realized they needed to be, as well as the ones that already were online knew they needed to ramp up their presence. Every time I talk to them, they're hiring somebody else. So I agree with Afia. You had to, if you were online before, you were in a much better position to tackle this.
Yeah, same. And also if you were a business that already kind of could ship your product or like get your product to the customer at home, those businesses were really easily able to transition sort of 100% of their time into that. Whereas I have clients that are only now in the next couple of weeks finally getting sort of the capacity and stuff together to ship their product. And so they lost sort of 6 to 8 months of like really great, I'm eating all my food at home, or I'm doing everything at home and I want it shipped time, where they were paying too much to drive products to people's houses, or spending way too much money on gas just driving all over the state. And so having sort of those things already up and running, which seemed sort of like something you wouldn't need before, turned out to be a huge boon for those businesses.
Yeah.
I would add, and I think this reflects on something that all of you said, is that in the beginning, I think we all thought this was a blip, right? We can all hunker down for 6 weeks or 2 months and then it'll all be fine. And so I don't think it was an unnatural instinct to say, all right, so if my store is closed, I'll think about it as a long vacation. I remember my daughter, my 24-year-old daughter was here. We had dress up nights. We played games. It was fun. We all thought this was short term. And guess what? It wasn't. And I think being prepared and thinking about, we could still be in our little boxes for, I don't know, 6 more months, 8 months, a year. I hate to think about it, but if you were waiting for this to be over, you obviously were taking the wrong path.
Yeah, there's a time to wait, and I understand the pausing, which for some people absolutely makes sense. So towards, I want to say the middle of December, I did notice in the Providence, southeastern Mass area, there were a number of restaurants who said, we're pausing now. We are going to reevaluate this coming spring. They had been going nonstop circles for months, trying to figure out how to make it happen. So that makes sense, right? You're going to pause and see what it looks like in 3-4 months. On the other side of it, you've got a number of these larger these conferences and things where honestly, you're not seeing anyone who's willing to do a live event until say October, November. And, you know, there's a real probability that, you know, people still won't be moving around as much. So, you know, kind of rethinking those pauses. But, you know, for me, my head was on fire in the early days because everybody was like PPP and we were scrambling to get everything together. When I finally picked my head up at one point, I was like, yeah, I don't think this is going away anytime soon. Like I've got to have a real heart to heart with clients and figure out what they want to do moving forward, like how they want to address what's happening, and then just kind of rethink my relationship with how I worked with my clients too. Because some need more support weekly and others don't right now.
I also think, and this is sort of one of my later questions, is that I think how people live their lives and how business is conducted is permanently changed. And if you haven't thought about what the impact of that is on how your business works, you're missing the boat. And I'll just give you a quick example. EforAll is literally, well, Joanne's on the call. She's our new Joanna is our new entrepreneur experience manager. We need to think about how EforAll interacts with our own clientele in a virtual environment. You know, like, does a 3-hour class still work? Should mentor meetings be in person or should they stay virtual? I mean, you have to rethink everything to stay relevant in this environment. And I'm assuming that the folks who are on our call are here because they get that that's the case.
Yeah, and we've definitely had businesses that have made decisions that, I mean, I've even been surprised at sometimes, and have really embraced that. So like a really successful restaurant in Boston that I think, you know, people were still going to at smaller capacity and doing takeout, and I mean, would have probably been fine throughout this, you know, decided to close and move all to consumer packaged goods. And, you know, that was a decision that they were like, look, this is going to be easier for us. And this is something that, regardless of what happens with the pandemic, we know that this is going to be steady. So like, why deal with the fluctuating regulations and stuff of having an open restaurant? And really kind of big decision, but their lease was up and they were like, this is what we're doing. And so, you know, you have to sort of just get with the times, unfortunately, and make sure that you're doing what's best for you and your business, but also what makes the most sense as well.
Yeah, because your industry.
Sorry, Afia.
No, go ahead.
So I actually was going to reiterate the importance of knowing your numbers in your business. On my end of it, there's some profit planning, but it's really just very, very basic when I'm speaking to my clients and talking about growth and what they will offer. But I think that what Lisa's saying, for me, you know, you want to know what your offer is and you want to know your profit margins. That was also a huge part of me knowing where to shift in my business, right? Because I knew where I made the most money. I knew where I needed to hire in order to make sure that that specific offer was able to scale quickly, right? So again, the workroom was not going to really yield any profit, but I knew that design and, you know, coaching would. And so knowing my numbers allowed me to make a quick decision and pivot.
Lisa?
I also think you need to keep your eyes not only on your local area, but your industry. I have one of my clients that their industry will probably never look the same. So they're having to really reevaluate how they do business every day. We, you know, having a conversation about, you know, well, we've never done this before. I understand, but the industry may never accept that particular standard anymore. So what do we think is going to happen? And really ready to make those leaps into those adjustments where they're constantly reevaluating what is happening and adjusting and reviewing and adjusting, because their industry may never look the same. Look at
can you tell
retail.
us what they do without giving them away?
They work in elder care. And so the elder care space may not look the same for, regardless of whether everybody gets vaccinated or not, because the elderly are so susceptible to the disease. Their world may not look anything like it used to, or even if it does come back, it could be 2-3 years after the rest of the world comes back to a place where things make sense. So you've got to constantly be reevaluating. But I agree with Priya. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Eli's Kitchen, which is based out of Warren. I can't remember Eli's last name, but he was on Chopped. And he announced just before New Year's that he was closing the restaurant because he realized during the pandemic he could continue to make food, feed people, do virtual events, cater, et cetera, and get the quality of life that he really wanted to spend with his children and get that back. And so he's made a decision comparable to, Priya's client that, it's a very successful restaurant, but just won't come back as a restaurant. So, there's no perfect scenario for everyone.
And I'll just say, as somebody who I was a business coach for 15 years before I came to EforAll. And I actually remember saying in my EforAll interview, can I tell people not to open restaurants? I happen to think they're really difficult businesses to make work unless maybe you're on Chopped and you can get that kind of social cachet that brings people in. But even in the best of times, in perfect weather and all the rest of those things, restaurants are really hard to work. I wonder, is there anybody on this call who's in a food business who has a restaurant? It'd be interesting to pick your brain, but if not, we can move right along. I don't see anyone raising their hand. I want to go back to some of the nuts and bolts, and this is going to count on my attorney and my CPA on this one. When you want to close your business, right? You could be a DBA, you could be an LLC, an S Corp, all these other kinds of corporate entities. Is there a reason to close or not to close? I mean, I know do I have to pay a tax bill even if I didn't make any money last year? What are the things that I want to balance to decide whether to do this? And do I have to pay my lawyer and my CPA to do it? And did I miss the boat by not closing last year? Or do I already owe this year's taxes?
So Lisa, do you want to answer all the tax related questions first?
Yeah, so when it comes to tax, so for instance, if you have something what are called trustee tax, if you have employees where you're paying payroll taxes or you're paying sales tax, you need to close your number down. If you don't close your number down, they're going to expect you to continue to file forms. When you don't file forms, they send you hate letters. And then you call your accountant and go, oh my God, Internal Revenue sent me a letter with your head on fire. It's because you did not alert them that you're no longer in business. So when it comes to that perspective, you want to alert the proper taxing authorities that you are no longer doing business. Now, does it matter if you waited until 2021 to close your business versus 2020? The reality is you're probably going to have a loss in your business, and that's why you are in fact closing. And so you probably won't have a tax bill for income tax. Keep in mind, sales tax and payroll tax was never your money. So you owe that to them. Those do not get discharged in your bankruptcies, nothing. Like the service stands there with their hand out wanting their payroll tax. You may get all your loans dismissed.
When I owned a business in California, it cost me $800 just to have it exist year to year, whether it made a penny or not. Is there anything like that?
That was probably your entity fee, right? That was your LLC fee or your, so you,
yeah.
So Lisa, should I talk about that now?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The other thing with like an S Corp, for instance, in Massachusetts, there's a minimum excise tax filing with the state for 456. So the longer you stay open, you've got to file one more return. So there may be some fees associated with it, but the rest of the fees are usually entity related on the Secretary of State site, which Priya can kind of respond to a little bit better.
Yeah. So your LLC filing is $500. on the anniversary every year, right? So just like the portion of your minimum excise tax that you would pay if you had an S corporation, you might have to pay for whatever portion of that your entity existed, right, since the last fiscal year. Or your last anniversary of filing if it's an LLC. So there's some sort of money that the Secretary of Commonwealth is owed, but other than that, you just need to file, and it's different, right? It's a dissolution of corporation, or it's a closing documents. But if you look at the Secretary of Commonwealth sites, they have everything like for LLCs and for corporations. And if you're an S corporation, it'd be a corporation. And as long as you don't have any debts to discharge, then you can just file that paperwork and you're good. If you're a DBA, you're a sole proprietor, which means all you have is a doing business as certificate. You don't have an entity. And so the state sees that as the same as, you know, you personally. So other than the tax implications that Lisa mentioned, right, for income tax and things like that, to let the IRS know, like, this business no longer exists. So I'm not going to be paying income tax on it, or, you know, any amendments to my normal tax return in relation to the business. You don't have to file anything at the state level aside. And then at the city level, right, because the DBA is with the city, you would just tell City Hall that, you know, this DBA no longer exists, and you would not have to, you know, renew that or anything. So it's easier, but this is assuming your business is debt-free.
Assuming your business is debt-free, and you just can't make money right now for whatever reason, and everyone has different kinds of businesses, and there might be reasons why you can or can't. How do I decide whether to close it or not? Like, is there some like litmus test for this?
So, I mean, from a legal standpoint, there is a certain amount of, depending on your entity, there is a certain amount of overhead you're paying, right? So like Lisa said, there's a minimum corporate excise tax if you have an S corporation. For an LLC, you have to pay not only your $500 yearly, but I guess if you don't have any income, you wouldn't have to pay any income taxes. But if you have income coming in for an LLC, you'd have to pay taxes on everything the business made, not only kind of what you put in your personal bank account, right? So you need to pay income tax on everything your business made that year. And so there is definite maintenance required. And so it depends. I would not recommend that anyone just sort of ignore their corporation or their LLC and just not tell the Secretary of Commonwealth, because you do that, you might think like, oh, the business isn't running anymore, whatever, I don't need to do it. But they still think it exists. So they're getting increasingly upset with you that you have not paid them, and then will eventually just close your business because you owe them money and you haven't paid them. But what will happen down the line is that when you want to open a new LLC, it's very possible that they'll be like, no, you're a bad actor who doesn't pay your LLC fees. We don't really want you to open any more LLCs in Massachusetts. So it's always better to have a good relationship with the state and just file that paperwork that you might need to file.
Very helpful. Can you talk a little bit, and you know, this might be a good AFIA question. How do you get over the feeling of failure when you close your business? You know, it's, you know, it feels very much like, well, I messed up. I couldn't do this. And I love that Lisa started by saying, you know, no one could have predicted this pandemic. But maybe there were other factors involved, and maybe it was on a personal level, or maybe the pandemic just hastened the inevitable. It's hard not to feel really rotten about this.
Sure. So for me, I had to get really, really clear on the fact that, you know, business isn't exactly an emotional thing, right? It is, you know, the numbers, it's the strategy, it's what, you know, it's business. And so in 2020, I just started really surrounding myself by, you know, like-minded professionals, people that were going through some of the things that I was going through. So I always talk about the importance of community. And so for me, that was really, really huge. I can be very hard on myself, can be very much so a perfectionist. And, you know, some of my friends were like, yeah, so you were opening a whole co-working space while your mom was battling cancer. Then a pandemic hit. Give yourself a break. You know, and I didn't think of that. I thought that it was a failure. I thought that it was, you know, I was still trying to push forward. So that accountability is also really important. I have a very close friend that's an attorney. She's very straight to the point and, you know, logical and practical on certain things. And so having that community around me that just reiterated to me how great I was and that this indeed wasn't a failure. Like Lisa said, like things happen that are outside of your control. And you pick up the pieces and you just kind of like reinvent. If you did it before, you can do it again. And that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, is that you are an innovative being and you can create again.
Lisa, Priya, do you have any other comments about the sort of the mindset of the entrepreneur who has to go through this?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this a lot too, that, I mean, everything's sort of a win in a way, right? Like if you are coming out of it with like a better quality of life and you're happier, then that's a win. It doesn't really matter sort of what's happened with your business. You know, some people's goals are to have a business for a little while and then sell it and get out of there. Some people want businesses for life and they want to leave it to their kids, right? And so like there's a lot of different ways to do this. And like if you're having a conversation and you know you're looking at your numbers and you're making a decision like this isn't for us, we need to get out, you know, that we really try to tell our clients like this is good, right? Like this is the way forward, this is the right decision, because you know you're going to just be more unhappy if you keep on doing something that is not going to, you know, be the best for you.
Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's a lot of mindset. Some of them that were in the mindset of I'm going to constantly reevaluate, and they were, and they did. They came to a realization the numbers just didn't make sense anymore. It didn't make sense to keep the doors open. You know, I don't have the quality of life I want anymore. For some, it was that the first time they may have stopped in a very long time, and they realized that they have been on a hamster wheel for 3, 4, 5 years, and they just didn't realize it. So for some of them, it's the opportunity came in the fact that it was finally the time to say, okay, it's time for me to move on. You know, instead of dragging it out, you know, another 3, 4, 5 years where you've got less quality of life, or you don't have your health any longer, or now your children are older and they're out of the house and you've lost that time with them, whatever it is. So I think for the ones that aren't coming to the other side of this with a business, it may or may not be a bad thing for them. For some of them, it's actually a good thing. They might be getting their lives back in some fashion. So I think initially there's that, ooh, okay, you know, my baby failed, but then it's, well, but you know what, maybe this wasn't the right thing for me all along anyways. And I just kept going because I felt like I was supposed to keep going. And so I think for some, this forced stop around March 15 and this reevaluation was, okay, I actually didn't have the dream that I thought I had. And in actuality, I was working in my business and not working on my business like I thought I was all these years. So for some of them, it turns out to be a better thing for them.
Yeah, I want to totally reinforce everything that you guys are saying in that this was an opportunity to reevaluate a lot of things. And maybe that's good. Maybe you can find the upside here. I tell the entrepreneurs who are just starting businesses, you don't, in our back of the envelope class, you don't want to create an expensive hobby. If it's not making money and it doesn't make sense, then it's, maybe this is just a chance to move on to the next thing, but to do it cleanly so that you have the next opportunity. Jessica Webb has a question. Jessica, you can unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, thanks very much. I've been loving all of this. It's been really hitting home for me. So I did close my business.
Can you tell us
After
what the
a-
business was?
Yes, I had a brick and mortar yoga studio. So we were non-essential. So we were told to close on March 13th. I pivoted almost immediately to online classes. Had 10 teachers working for me, and they all went off and did their own thing. All online classes became for them something they could do on their own. They didn't really need me anymore, and that was sort of fine. At the end of the day, I chose to close around late June, but officially closed in July because I could kind of see that this is not going to end anytime soon. As you guys were saying, we're still in this. It keeps going up and down and up and down. So I saw the forest for the trees. I did some inner gazing to see if this is really where do I really want to hang out in this space a lot, or do I just want to, cut bait? So I did decide to close. And my question actually is, now that I've closed, I've, filed with the Secretary of State, I've made sure I'm debt free. I did receive a small PPP loan. I'm still waiting for the application for the forgiveness. And I want to know, what do I do with these my bank account? I had an operating account. It's got pennies left in it. Do I keep these bank accounts open for any reason? Why would I need to keep these bank accounts open? Or do I need to close my bank accounts, my business accounts?
So I would close your bank accounts. If you usually want to leave them open for a period after the fact, for any kind of filings that may come along or last minute expenses. But if you have only pennies in there and you don't expect any other expenses other than, your last tax return, I would close them all down completely. Depending on, one of the things that I did want to say is with regard to the EIN, when you send your letter to the service and close down your number, if you had an EIN assigned to you as a sole proprietor, that number will be your number forever. So that number doesn't go away. So if you were to decide to open another business, you couldn't open another business as a sole prop. You could, but you would just reassign that number. So you want to keep that number in hand somewhere if you do choose to have another DBA type of a sole prop business. But I don't see any reason to have any of your bank accounts unless you think something's going to pop up an expense. But other than that, I wouldn't. It's time you can close them.
Yeah, okay. I would expect I would owe taxes owe taxes for 2020, but not.
How are you organized? Are you
a sole member LLC?
Oh, okay.
Right. So you are Schedule C anyways, which means you would
Yes.
file that on your personal tax return.
Got it.
I mean, honestly, if you weren't profitable, you won't have any self-employment tax on that.
Right.
And then any kind of losses would forward onto the rest of your return as, a reduction of any kind of other earned income. So I wouldn't expect your tax bill to be too hefty.
Okay. Yeah, but
And if you were an LLC, the EIN, you would get a new one if you opened a different business.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought you were a DBA. Yeah, if you're a DBA, that number follows you. Like you can't get, as an individual, you individually can only get assigned one EIN once in your life.
But an entity is its own entity.
Yeah, that's a life of itself.
And so it has its own life. And so that number was for that entity. And if you were ever to open another LLC, then you would get a new EIN.
Right. So actually, I think Jessica brought up another question, which wasn't her question, but I'm going to ask it, which is she got a PPP loan. She's waiting for the paperwork on forgiveness. And I think everyone believes it's going to be forgiven. But if it's not, is she personally liable for it?
So did you spent it all on forgivable expenses?
On my salary.
Payroll and things like
Payroll,
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you spent your PPP loan on forgivable expenses and you have the paperwork to show that, then you should be fine. It should be forgiven. If it isn't forgiven for some reason, then you would be personally liable for it as a loan.
Yeah.
And it has relatively good terms, but still you didn't want a loan. So hopefully that does not happen. And if you default on that, since it's the government and you gave a personal guarantee, you would still be personally liable. So even though the business is closed, you can't default on the loan because that would cause a lot of negative things for your personal credit, which I'm assuming you don't want. But
And
the
does
goal
it
is
matter? Thank you. Does it matter that the loan money went into the bank account that I'm looking to close? Would they see that I closed it? She's gone. Took the money and ran. We're not going to forgive her.
As long as you have solid paperwork that the money came in and you used it for forgivable expenses, you should be fine.
Okay. The bank account doesn't need to be around anymore. Okay.
No, a lot of people don't realize there are certain aspects of what the service can track and they can't, and there are just things that they have no idea. So I have a client who is a single member LLC. He only has the EIN just because he's a single member LLC. He doesn't use it for anything and called me in a panic. You know, he had, what did he have to do? Oh, I know. He had to, the arrangements in the office were changing. He had to get Verizon. Well, in order to get business Verizon, he needed to have the EIN, and he was afraid that the service would know that he had a Verizon account. I was like, okay, no, the service is not that savvy. They don't know those things. Don't worry, and they don't care that your EIN has a Verizon account. So there are certain things that they're just not as savvy about as we think that they would. So they have no idea your bank accounts are open. The only thing they would know is if you deposited over 10,000 into it, that's when they get alerted. But even then it's just an alert and they don't know anything beyond that. So
all they want to see from you is the paperwork of that money going into your account and then being used for forgivable expenses. And
that's it.
Yeah. And so if you can show that, then I'm assuming your PPP loan was not huge. And therefore, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Thank you.
Jessica, do you want to tell us what's next for you?
Oh, thank you so much. I will say that it took a long time for me to recover from that closing. I felt like it had, I felt guilty about it. Now I feel amazing. I have great quality of life. I also went through EforAll with a nonprofit. So the summer of 2017 was my cohort in the South Coast. And my nonprofit is becoming my priority. And the nonprofit is Yoga Outreach, which again, it's not a brick and mortar. We went into places, which we can't go into places. So I paused the nonprofit. I closed the for-profit. So pausing the nonprofit has now me sort of open to opportunities, open to new ideas, open to something, open to, I don't know what. We're going to have to remodel. We're going to have to redesign. I don't know what we're going to look like on the other side of this. So we paused the nonprofit. So we'll see. Thank you.
As much as this has been a horrible time for a lot of people personally and business-wise, this really has been for many people. I call it a forced opportunity to really reevaluate what was going on. I mean, you realized after you had your mourning period that your baby was gone, you realized you lost your quality of life. And so there are things like that you reevaluate what's important. You want to be home with your kids, or you want to be near your parents, or be able to garden or paint or whatever. And you realize, you know what, it's just what I was doing wasn't working for me. And so it's initially sad and you go through that mourning period, but for you, it just wasn't right at that moment. And it forced you. It created a forced opportunity. For some people, the opportunity was a little bit different, but.
Heidi, I know you just typed into the chat box. Can you unmute and ask your question? She actually has a question for Jessica.
Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. How are you? I'm in Boulder, Colorado. For all the East Coast, I'm from the East Coast originally, and I spent a lot of time in Providence. I was at Brown. So I love everyone on the East Coast. Thank you for all this incredible support for everyone. I have a nonprofit that last year we attempted to pivot because we were doing all in-person programs with youth entrepreneurship for social change. So it's like an E4All, except for youth, to address social problems and challenges. And so our experiment for 2020 was to have a cohort of young people come in and actually look at more mentoring them to have a youth-led experience. And they created an online hackathon for a reverse pandemic so that young people could address the challenges of the pandemic, it was exciting, but there was no money for anything. We were really just doing stuff that we thought was interesting right now and relevant, especially for the kids who were feeling very isolated, the youth. And with the online school being miserable, and this gave them an opportunity to do something different. And then we were working on a revenue model, a sustainable revenue model that we really just needed a few more months and a few staff members to just complete, maybe even a month, and launch. And it's kind of done, but I'm nervous to launch because I don't have a staff right now. I don't have a paid staff. And I've found through COVID, everything we did pretty much in the past 5 years even has been largely either on volunteer or a project fund, someone paid specifically for a program. It's been all fits and starts. We haven't had, because we wanted to really experiment with the business model and see where's the business model. So we were going to do a scalable online product that we'd ready, and we were getting ready to launch. And my father got sick with cancer, and I have kids at home, and I'm a single parent half the time, and I have to still manage the household. I just got slammed. I mean, I just was like, I had maybe 3 hours of productive work a day, and to actually be able to focus, given trying to keep people alive in my life, honestly. And so I really wanted to be healthy. I was like killing myself. I was not sleeping. I was trying to do all this. People really love our organization. I get interest all the time. I'm just exhausted, and I'm trying to get healthy again. And I want to focus on my family. And so when she said pause, I kind of said to my whole volunteer team and advisors in November and December, I'm pausing until the new year, knowing that no one would really notice that much around that time. But now I think people are probably expecting me to start coming online again. And I've been doing a lot of thinking work, but I'm not ready to launch anything, do anything without, I feel like, a paid staff and or some funding in place. And I have a sustainable product, but I don't want to launch that because I can't be the 100% customer service on it. And I can't rely on volunteers 100% because COVID, it's nobody's fault, but things happen with volunteers, even paid people, things happen. So you need like double and triple backup plans, it seems. Anyway, so I'm wondering what it means to pause that. And I'm really in that inquiry of, what to do, because what we have, we think the kids could really use right now on with their experience with online school, but I just need a whole operational team or something to just kind of put it out there. So I'm just curious about the pausing that you mentioned, which gave me a kind of a sigh of relief in my body when I heard that, Jessica. And the way that you were so clear, you're like, I shut down the business, I paused this, and you feel so
no, Heidi, I think you bring up a bunch of good questions, including one. I just want to make a point. I think so many of us have had our working conditions change. As Priya said at the beginning, my kid might wander in. I think that we cannot underestimate the fact that our own bandwidth has changed substantially as we try to balance everything that's going on in the new world. So you get a permission slip from me, that's okay. Everybody has that problem. But Afia said something that actually made me think about this, which is there's still a continuity, that there's an expectation that your community and that people still want to be in touch with you even when you're in pause. So I think that that's worth, how do you pause it without losing some of your momentum? So I'm going to leave that to my panelists. You guys, how did we figure this out?
Thank you.
I think the most immediate thing that for me is to make sure that you're nurturing. I think of marketing and just really growth as attract, nurture, and convert, right? And so if you are in a place where you have to pause, there are just some simple things that you can do to keep in contact with your people. And that could just be your email list of, staying in touch with them and letting them know exactly what's happening. So I've always taken an authentic approach to just how I keep my audience engaged, or at least try to.
Thank you.
Jessica, how are you doing that? How are you making sure that people still know that you exist while you're paused?
Well, actually, we went into a kind of a silent period, honestly. The board of directors, we paused all of our programs. We let all of our partners know. It was obvious that we needed to pause all of our programs and let the partners know. Then we made it official at one of our board meetings. So in the nonprofit world, it's just going under dormancy. So we went into dormancy period until May. We agreed that we would resurface in May. But I'm using this time, honestly, to redesign the website for the nonprofit, to rebuild our email list for the nonprofit. I'm actually enjoying it so I can play catch up. And honestly, nobody's batting an eye. Everyone understands. I don't feel like there's a lot of pressure to keep it up, because everyone's like, whoa, you're going to pause? Great. You're going to go dormant? Great. Honestly, we can't wait to see what you come back out with. So for me, it's been, luckily, it's allowed me to take a nice deep breath.
Great. I just want to point out we have about 15 minutes left, and I love that Jessica and Heidi were able to tell their stories and talk about where they were and get some feedback. We have, another handful of people who are here. Does anybody else want to sort of check in with our experts, talk about your situation, get some support and feedback? Sylvia, please unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sylvia. I came from the South Coast 2016 Summer Accelerator. My business was reinforced knee pants for active kids. I went through the whole process. It was a passion project, a problem that my son created, years and years ago and kept doing. And so I really felt the need to create this product. Built the website, designed the product, had it tested, got it trademarked, filed for a utility patent, went through the whole production process, the fits, it was importing children's testing manuals for apparel. And I was really proud of, what I did and what I accomplished. My website looks great. I was happy. We went live. I sold a few items. And then as it went, I was paying people for social media help, and I wasn't reaching my audience. And so in 2018, I had some sales. I did some pop-ups. I was both in stores and then at school, my son's school, and different areas, doing pop-ups where I did sell some items. But what happened in 2019, I was diagnosed with early stage breast cancer. And I got to a point where I was like, I'm not paying anybody any, the year before I had kind of paused on the social media paying somebody. We were doing it ourselves. Again, I still wasn't reaching my audience. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I pretty much said, I can't focus on this right now. I need to focus on myself and on my family and everything. So went through that whole ordeal that year, and was pretty clear in my mind that I didn't have to think about that. It was tabled. I don't owe anybody money. I financed everything myself. The only thing I'm sitting with now is inventory, and it's about 1,200 units. So it's in my personal space. I don't have a warehouse or anything. So honestly, I'm not paying anybody anything except the state and then filing my taxes. So I've renewed my license for another year. Then I was like, 2020 is going to be my year. I'm back. I'm healthy. And then the pandemic hit. And then my mom, unfortunately, perished after having COVID. So it's been somewhat of a tumultuous 2 years for me personally. And I'm kind of fine having my business on hold. I just don't know what to do, and when to get back into it, and how to reach my audience that I wasn't reaching, and how do I move my inventory. I was even thinking at some point, because again, it was a personal investment and a personal passion project, that I could, find a charity or an organization that would, I would donate the garments to be given to children in need. So that was one option I'm thinking of pursuing. But the decision for me to pause was easy, again, because it was a health mandated decision, and the decision to, is this really where, I'm a designer and I love designing, and I was really stoked and happy about what I did, but I'm not a business person, and I learned that a little too late. After having gone through the whole thing, it's like, I need help on the other end of it, on the marketing and on the business side. So again, I don't know if I've answered any questions, or that was my story. So I'm now going into a new year and saying, okay, well, they're a long pants, so obviously it's not a spring and summer product. So do I focus and shift into, again, there was no back to school, so it was like, I can't, like, back to school shopping was not really a thing. But if I do go back to it, it will be for like the early summer, August into the fall, as like I said, the product is more cool weather appropriate.
So do any of the panelists have thoughts to share with Sylvia?
I would think you would want to be building, like Afia talks about, your community, at least I think still trying to reach socially to find out if your people are still there, right? Is there still a want or a need from a real business perspective for your product? So I think you would, I think Afia could probably comment far greater on this topic than I can. But you're creative, and honestly, creatives traditionally have significant challenges with running their businesses. In many cases, once they get to a certain point, they usually bring in what's, atypically called an integrator. That's what it's called in EOS, but because you're always coming up with a new idea, and you want to be creative, and you don't want to worry about what the business process is to make sure that, the product gets in an envelope and mailed off to your customer. So, but I would think, from a marketing perspective, would she continue to try to touch in some fashion the base that she had?
Lisa?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Can you repeat what you said, the last part, please?
Oh, okay. No, I was just thinking, like, from a marketing perspective, would she want to possibly get back out socially in some fashion and start to try to reconnect with the base that she had, or reconnecting with her list, or something, from a more of a connection community type of perspective?
Sure. I think what I said earlier, as far as just building out your email list, and then being in associations and groups that are, I want you to kind of think of where your audience is. So I drew an explanation earlier, or an example earlier, that had to do with, for example, a career coach, and maybe not necessarily hanging out on Instagram, although there are innovative ways to do that. But, maybe hanging out on LinkedIn, and in that way, just hanging out where your audience is. If you can give me a little bit more context of what you're looking to do. I didn't hear that last piece that Lisa said, but let me know if that's helpful, Sonia.
Yeah, I think the issue that I was having prior to my illness and prior to the pandemic was that I was having trouble reaching my audience.
Oh, okay.
And so it's difficult to get someone to pay $48 for a pair of pants, but then they'll go buy a pumpkin that's going to rot in 2 weeks and pay $40 for it. So I've had trouble reaching my audience, and I had help. I had, I went through 3 different social media marketing people, marketing companies to help me with this. So if they couldn't crack it, I don't know how I will. It is again a more elevated product, so I need to be in the space where I have moms who have, a little bit more earth conscious. And I think that on the other end of this whole pandemic, with the retailers closing down, fast fashion took a big hit, and that the whole point of my product is that it lasts longer, and so you're not buying 5 pairs of pants. You're going to have 1 or 2 that'll get you through the whole fall, the whole season. So on the other end of the pandemic, where in my world in fashion, it's pretty much shattered. No one's delivering. No one's going to want to take in product every month. I'm a designer for knitwear right now, but we're still designing such huge lines, and people are still designing lines, but like how you just don't need all that stuff anymore. And I think that people working at home realize you don't need as much clothes as you have. You don't need new shoes, and you don't need, what I mean? So it's hard for me to enter or to try to sell I felt like, how am I going to try to sell my pants when people can't even feed their kids, So there's a lot of.
But I don't think your ideal, in many cases, you've got to, I think if you get clear on who your ideal client is and where they live, perspective, your ideal is a specific type of mother. And so while she may be working from home and has no need for another pair of heels, her 5-year-old who keeps destroying the knees on his pants is still going outside and playing. So I think maybe, I don't know. I'm not a marketing person, I can help you hash numbers all over that place, but.
I can add to that, Lisa, and thank you, Sylvia, for additional context. So, and I'm sorry, my internet is kind of like coming in and out a little bit. So I hope you guys can hear me. As far as what you said, there were a lot of things that you just said as far as the reason why the product is still needed. You talked about the fact that you don't have to purchase over and over again. So from a marketing perspective, there's definitely the social media aspect, but I want you to think about, are you educating your consumer? So what that looks like in our 2021 is maybe having some TikTok videos of the reason why. Like you see a lot of those videos where they're pointing to different things. Like that may be an innovative way. And then remembering that the consumer is obviously a mom, right? So even if you had, again, from a marketing perspective, a video that taught a little bit more, or, a kid like scraping their knee and how aggravating it is for that to happen, how long it took to heal. And if they just had this, long lasting pant that could save them, the frustration, then that would be it. Or for me, my 8-year-old who's always under the table somewhere, right? If I had these pants and maybe I was out of Band-Aids, right? And, so just really kind of being innovative in marketing. I think what's really, really key right now is making sure that we can educate our consumers. Sometimes our consumer doesn't know that they need what we have. So just kind of thinking about that part as well, of how you can really educate them and solve a problem that they have.
That's great. We are actually just about out of time. I don't know if any of the panelists want to leave a parting comment. This has been great, and thank you for the audience, for those of you who are brave enough to tell us about your situation. Lots of people are struggling. You are not alone, and I think the panelists have been really helpful in helping us think through some of the issues. Any last thoughts, Lisa?
I think my dogs knew that they knew. I think the biggest thing is just be open to constantly reevaluating what's going on, because you may have to just keep jiggering just a little bit to the left, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the left, to either make it to the other side or find what your new sweet spot is. Because one of the questions you sent us earlier was, what was it? I think it was kind of coming back to business after the pandemic. For some of you, it may never be the same. So I think you need to really realize that the way we've always done things may not come back, and be aware of that and just be open to that. But on the other side of it, there could be a huge opportunity here that because something in your marketplace has shifted, now has opened up the door for something else. So I think just being open to what is happening, while it is chaotic and sometimes hard to bear, be open to what's shifting and just reevaluate it, take a look at it and see if it makes sense, make that shift, to potentially make your business better than it was before.
Thank you. Very inspirational. Afia, you got anything for me?
No, this has been a really great conversation. If I can think of anything, it would just simply be to give yourself grace during this time. And I've explained a couple of reasons of why I've had to pause, close, or pivot, and know that, sometimes these trials are opportunities for us to really gain back quality of life or just reassess what we're doing. And you never lose, you win or you learn.
I love that. Life is not a dress rehearsal. This is it, people. We got this one. Priya.
Yeah, no, all of this. And also don't be afraid or, embarrassed to ask for help and to reach out to your community, your EforAll community. You guys are always more than welcome to talk to us at Lawyers for Civil Rights. There's a lot of resources for business owners and entrepreneurs, and there's nothing wrong with sort of asking for help and using these resources to make the best decision for you.
I have absolutely nothing to add. What a great panel. Thank you all for hanging in there with us. This was a fantastic deep dive. It has been recorded. So if you missed anything or you want to revisit it, you can. We hope we see you next month to learn negotiation skills. And thank you again to the panelists. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.